Wow, that's big. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. This is a great conference. As was just announced, there's parties on, what was it yesterday? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and probably also on Saturday. And in between, you even have some talks, right? That sort of puts the perspective on. So, this is a tough talk for me because I've been doing this quite a while, but I recently started doing another talk, which I just created last week, and I managed to put some of that material into this one as well. So I ended up with 164 slides. Now, I only have 50 minutes. Now, you can do the math, right? So I had to remove some of them, but I still have 80 left, right? So I'm going to talk a bit fast, maybe, and I might even have to skip a slide here and there. But we'll try anyway. So who am I? I'm Sander. I'm basically an independent dad of 3, and my girlfriend has 2 more kids, so it's a tough job. And if I can find some time, I do other stuff as well, like doing a bit of coaching and mentoring. And I write code. I've been writing code for 35 years already. I speak a bit, I write a bit, and I like to travel a bit. Currently, as an independent, I got hired by a company called 101 Ways, which is a UK-based agile consultancy firm. And we put teams into client to help them solve their problems. And before that, I used to be the CTO of some companies, and I was a global agile thought leader, whatever that may be, at a small company called Capgemini, which we just passed their office by on the way here, right? Cool. This is my website, my Twitter tag, etc., etc. So this was the introduction. I spent way too much time on that already. So here we go. As you all might have realized, you might not know this guy, only us old people. I'm not going to ask, but there's only like very few people who have my age, I guess. I'm 51, so that's 42, which is the basic number, and then some years of experience with that. But he's even older, right? And he said the times are changing. Well, to be quite honest, yes, the times they are changing, but they are changing faster than you think. And they're going to change faster and faster and faster and faster. And you know who causes that? It's us, right? We who write the code. We make the world change these days. And I'll show you. So, this you all know, right? This is Moore's law. And Moore's law says that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit, it doubles every 2 years. Now, if you look at the graph, you think this is a linear line. This is not a linear line. It goes up, it goes up that way really, really fast. That means our capabilities of doing stuff, they grow and they grow and they grow, and they grow faster and faster and faster. To give you an idea, when Amazon first delivered a computer to my door back in 1954, it looked like this, right? This is big. This is big. I'll show you the first computer that I actually wrote code on to make money with. It's this one. You know the 2 black things in there? You know what goes in there? A floppy disk. Most of you probably have never seen a floppy disk, right? Do you? Oh, good. So you must all be Java developers, right? Or COBOL developers. It was funny. From the hotel, I almost got on the wrong bus because there was a whole bunch of elderly people leaving into a bus. And I was like, oh, that's the way to our COBOL conference. But so anyway, can you imagine what this thing had? It had 64K bytes in it, right? 64K. And you could write code in that. That was pretty cool, right? I thought it was pretty cool. I had a black screen with green characters on it. Pretty cool stuff. And then, let's move on a bit. In 2006, Amazon decided to open up their machines to other people, to other companies. Now that, and I'm not saying Amazon per se, but other companies started following as well, that changed the world again. Because that allowed us to not only have code running on our own machines, sitting in the basement somewhere of our own company, it allowed us to get rid of that stuff and make use of a much larger group of computers to do our work with, right? And that opened up the market for totally different companies to come in. And I'm going to show you some examples of that, by the way. And just to make the point really clear, that actually changed everything we do, again, in this field. Now, to give you an idea about how fast technologies are adopted, I'll show you a few technologies, right? Like, for instance, automobiles. Before 15 million people had a car, or drove a car, actually, it took 62 years. Right? Before ATMs got accepted to have 50 million users, it took 18 years. And that went faster and faster, right? To adopt Twitter, 50 million users, took 2 years. I think they went down back to like 10 users these days. But anyway, they're still there. But if you look at current technologies, this is the difference, right? It's 18 days before Pokemon Go reached 50 million users and caused a lot of traffic accidents, by the way. But 19 days, actually, so it's a day longer, right? So this is why and how it changes. Now, if you look into different markets, for instance, if you would look into fintech, fintech is a market that has rapid change. This little graph here is basically showing fintech companies in the Netherlands. And there's this graph has like 350 in it. The version 4 of this graph, which I couldn't find last night, basically due to wine, and has like 450 companies in it. They're all working on something in the fintech industry, right? Now imagine that if you are a company that is thinking about building bank software, where you used to have a basement full in a large building in Amsterdam, if you were a large bank in the Netherlands, with 10,000 of people running and operating your machinery and writing your COBOL code. You could now do that. Well, actually, my girlfriend Kim's company is actually doing this. She'll probably tell about that tomorrow. And other companies are doing it as well, with a small group of people, not even running on your own hardware anymore. So that means all sorts of other companies can come into your market. And that changes perspective, right? So if you are a bank, a traditional brick-and-mortar bank, you get competitors like Monzo in the UK, which is an online bank, or N26 in Germany. Or even worse, you know, ING, which is one of the largest banks in the Netherlands, they say, this is their CEO, and he says basically the biggest threat does not come from fintech startups. It comes from companies who do have the money and the ability to build this software really well, like the Amazons, maybe Google, maybe Apple, maybe even Facebook. Who knows? Those are the companies that he's scared of. And the funny thing is, all sorts of other companies are coming into this field as well. So if you look at an airplane company like AirAsia, they have to do a lot of transactions on board. If they sell stuff on board, you need to pay for that, so they need some sort of payment system. And they were like, oh, you know what? We have money. We can go into international banking as well. So competitors come at you from all different angles. And that means that you are going to have to change. That means you have to change the way your culture works, change the way you write code, change the way you test code, change the way you deploy code, and change the way you keep it into production. So actually, if you group that all together, I started referring to this as the world of small movable parts. And it's a bit of everything. It's a bit of not doing these stupid old long-running projects anymore. Who of you is in a project that already runs for more than a year? Oh, good. It's only like 30%, and the rest of them doesn't dare to raise their hands, right? That's terrible. You should look at doing things differently. Basically, the whole project metaphor, I'm going to try to debate that, does not really work in this industry. It has never worked in this industry either, right? All of these large software development projects, they all failed. There was a large government research in the Netherlands being done a few years ago, actually by the Dutch parliament, and they sort of researched the 37 biggest IT projects in government. They had all failed to a cost of some 250 million, for instance, some of these projects. That's really terrible. They never delivered anything. Now, that's just a waste of taxpayers' money, right? So you should move from doing projects to building products. Also, I think we will move to even shorter cycles. Who of you is doing Scrum? It's old-fashioned. No, it is actually. I think we're going to move to much shorter cycles than we did during the agile period. I think we will move beyond that into continuous flow, right? Also, I think we're going to move to even smaller teams or differently organized teams, and I'll try to tell a bit about that too. And of course, we're going to move to not building monolithic applications anymore, but build everything into very, very small parts. Not only back-end services, but also your front end. We will start splitting up front ends too in very, very small pieces because that makes them replaceable. And it makes them more easy to deploy, right? So we can move to shorter cycles. All this together is going to happen, or is happening already, right? And that means you don't have time to do a lot of things, to do a lot of preparation, to do a lot of planning. It means you have to figure out to do it differently. That's why this model comes in handy. This is called the Cynefin model. It was written down by a guy called Dave Snowden, who's a professor in Wales at Bangor University. And he says, there's different zones in here. There's the simple zone. Now, the simple zone, problems in there basically means that they're easy to solve. If you figure out what the problem is, you can solve it. If you have the cause, you figure out the effect. Easy, right? And then there's the complicated zone. In the complicated zone, people say, you know what, there is some sort of cause, some sort of problem. And if we think about it long enough, if we reason about it long enough, if we find enough business analysis to look at this, we will find a solution, we'll be able to build it, and we're done, right? This is basically, well, it maps really good to waterfall practices. But the problem is, we have never been there. We have never been, and I hope that the previous introduction showed that, in this particular field. We've been in a field that it's very hard to predict where we'll be in the next year, let alone be there where we are in 5 years' time. That means, at most, and that is where the complex zone comes in, you can find the dot at the horizon, say, okay, we want to go sort of there, and we're going to take a small step, try it out, see what happens, and take a next step. Whether that's in exactly the same direction or not depends on the outcome of the previous step. And there's no way you can do all this planning anymore. It has never worked in this industry because it changes so fast. And because it's going to change even faster, we will never be able to do this anymore. So all of those projects, all of that waterfall stuff, but even agile projects will have to go. You could be worse. You could be in the chaotic zone, basically saying, I have no clue where I want to be. If you're in a company like that, go away. Figure out a way to get in a company that is in the complex area, because it makes life a bit easier. You know where you're going. You have a purpose. You know where to go, right? So that means all of this traditional stuff, like project management. You know, actually the first time I got to Krakow was like 6 years ago for a project management conference. I would never go there. It's obsolete in this business. We should get rid of this. Same goes if you are in a company that makes these detailed plans for the next 3 years, get rid of them. If you are into an enterprise agile transformation, that's probably the most horrifying thing you can do these days, get rid of it. Leave. Go to a different company, right? Find a different job. That's it. Because the only thing you can do is set the dot at the horizon and say, okay, we've identified these things. Maybe we'll get there. Try it out. Do something. Take the next item from the roadmap. See where you end up. And see if you get into the direction of where you're going. And you'll never be able to get exactly where you think that you want to be 5 years before now. Right? So roadmaps are the best we can do so far. That also means projects will go out of the door because they have never worked. Right? You cannot say, I'm going to build something, it's going to be done in 2 years, I'm going to create a detailed plan to get there and work on that project. The best thing you can do is start building products and add feature to it and think really small. Create more small items. Take the next item, implement it, put it into the product, next item. That's the cycle you're going to be in, right? And you learn from that continuously. That's what you need to do, I think. That also means all this estimation stuff, and whether that's agile estimation stuff or whatever you do, t-shirt sizing or planning poker, you can just get rid of it because it does not add value anymore. Also, given the fact that there's something called the law of large numbers, which I'll try to read out to you, it doesn't really make sense to do all this detailed estimation. So stop doing that. The law of large numbers says, basically, if you perform the same experiment, like doing an estimate on a work item, a large number of times, the result. According to the law, the average of the results obtained from doing a large number of trials. So if you estimate like 100 work items, but that already starts at about 20, the result should be close to the expected value, right? So if you estimate on a scale from 1 to 5, and you estimate 100 items, and you add them up and you take the average, it'll probably be around 3. That means you can just name them all 1 if they're small enough, and you can stop doing estimation. Right? Try it. It actually works. I've been doing this for like at least a decade. So my basic statement here is stop doing these projects. I'll repeat that. Stop doing projects. But I'll repeat it later on as well. So what's the next? If you're in a large company, large companies think they have to scale Agile. Agile doesn't scale. It doesn't have to scale either, right? So stop doing all that. So what does Agile really mean? Does it mean we implement Scrum? Does it mean we use the Scrum ceremonies? We use the words? A lot of companies just do that. I got into my previous client and they were doing refinement sessions. And I was like, why? And they did that with the whole team, like 20 people in a room. Took them all day to just talk about these simple work items. And I was like, couldn't you do that like with 3 persons and the rest can just do whatever they want to do? Saves a lot of time. And they were like, no, we have to do this. It's mandatory, right? There's no such thing as mandatory, I think. You should always think about what you're doing. So if you're moving to large-scale Agile, does that mean you do just Scrum, but then in multiple teams, and you have the Scrum of Scrums? Or does it mean you actually have to have an enterprise Agile process? Agile enterprise processes go in exactly the opposite direction you want to go. You want to go to smaller, shorter, faster. These go into larger, bigger, more people, more consultants, people wearing ties coming and suits coming into your company. Right? That is not the direction you want to go to. Even things like sociocracy or holacracy, it's just a huge catalog of patterns that you could apply. Do you want to apply all of them? No, you don't. You want to apply as minimal as possible, right? Or even Spotify. Who of you is doing the Spotify model? Do you having oh dear, my image goes out. Do you have like tribes and guilds and all that kind of stuff? And all the managers that go to it? There was a bank in the Netherlands who tried to implement this. And they implemented the model. They had tribe leaders, and they had chapter leads, and they had guild leads, and they had squad leads. And then above that, they had like 11 layers of management, right? You can imagine they failed at this, right? And the thing is with the Spotify model is, if you're not Spotify, why would you simply adopt this model? Spotify is an extremely fast-growing company, at least they were. And they needed a model that could help them do that. If you're not a company like that, if you're not as growing as fast as Spotify is, why would you adopt this model, right? It has nice elements in it. So what you think I should do is, if you're not Spotify, don't do the Spotify model. And I always say to that, unless you actually are Spotify, because I've always seen people in the room saying, yeah, but we work at Spotify. And by the way, they're not doing it anymore. So the thing is what you should do. What I think is, your company, your organization, your team should find its own way in being agile and being as fast as possible. Don't just adopt somebody's model and stick to that and make it mandatory, because you get stuck. Agile is about learning continuously. So find your own way in doing that. And stop doing projects, because they'll kill you. So what's next? So even shorter cycles. I promised that too, right? Now, if you have shorter cycles, so I guess most of you are doing sprints, right? Yes, Sander, we're all doing sprints. Wow. Did you all go to the party last night, or what happened? I thought the party wasn't until today. Anyway, so the thing is, sprints are okay, right? They're good. But the thing is, there's also some overhead into it, right? You start with a sprint and you figure out what to do. Take some time. You estimate it. You make sure it exactly fits into your sprint. And then you try to do everything that's in your sprint. And in the end of the sprint, you try to deliver just that, what you did. Who of you has done that and it matched exactly what it was in the sprint and the sprint length for maybe 4 to 5 sprints in a row? I've never seen a company actually make that fit. The reason is we're not good at estimation. That makes it very hard. If we even identify items that we do in 2 weeks or maybe 4 weeks, whatever you do, it still is very hard to make it exactly fit into your cycle. Also, what I see people do is spend a lot of time on this estimation stuff, of which I just said, that is just not necessary anymore if you have small enough work items. And I see a lot of people do these refinement sessions with large teams, and they eat up a lot of your time, sometimes even up to 10% of your sprint. And the question is, do you really need to do this? Now, I'll give you an example from a project that I visited in Belgium. When I worked at Capgemini, I used to do something called a flying squad. Basically meaning if somewhere in the world a project was in trouble, they phoned up head office in Paris and they said, could you issue a flying squad? Some people flew in, that's why it's called a flying squad, looked at the project and tried to solve the things that went wrong. So I got into a project in Brussels. It wasn't really a flying squad because I live in the Netherlands. You could just drive there, right? Which is a shame, actually, because I like flying. And I got into this project and I talked to the project manager, because it still had one. And I said, so what is wrong? He said, well, we're building this software, and this client is an atomic energy agency, and they don't want to accept the software. I said, why not? He said, well, we didn't define any acceptance criteria. And I said, well, makes sense to have them. And they said, well, yeah, we had a Scrum Master, and he said, acceptance criteria are not in the Scrum Guide. This is true, right? This is an actual story. And I said, okay. I said, well, do you have a plan or something? He said, no. I said, well, let me guess. Your Scrum Master says there's no such thing as a project plan in the Scrum Guide, which there isn't, by the way. He said, yeah, how do you know? Well, but the funny thing is, they started doing user stories. User stories are also not in the Scrum Guide, by the way, right? So if you're doing user stories, you're not doing Scrum right. People always say, oh, you're not doing Scrum right. I couldn't care less, basically. Anyway, so I said, so what are you doing? I said, well, we're building this software, and here's the burn down chart. So I looked at it and they said, well, at the start of the sprint, they sort of figure out how much work to do. And then if you look at the black line, that's where they should have ended. But they ended right there. They still had some work left at the end of the sprint. Okay, could happen, right? It happens to all of us. And then the next sprint came along, and they still had some work left, meaning the amount of remaining work, because of course he had already made a plan about the estimated velocity and whatever you could have, to end up at the end of the project. And then the third one went along. They even had more work, and the fourth one, and the fifth one, and the sixth one, and it went on and on and on. This is the point in time that I went into the project. And I looked at it and I said, so what will happen? And the project manager says, well, we did approximately like 1,000 points on average per sprint, and we only have 3 sprints left before the deadline. And that means, on average, for the next 3 sprints, we will have to deliver 3,000 points per sprint. And I'm like, okay, so how are you going to do this? And he said, well, we're going to hire 100 people from India. That solves everything, right? It's just, large companies think that way, right? If you just hire 100 people from somewhere where you think people are really smart, it'll work, right? We could hire 100 Polish developers and solve all our problems. Well, it doesn't really work that way, actually. And that's why I say, you could probably do a little bit better. Now, if you look at the Agile manifesto, it says, to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. It does not say have 2 or 4 week sprints. It says deliver continuously. Right? Continuously means as often as you can, sort of. Right? It means multiple times per day. Or once per day. It doesn't mean once every 2 weeks. Nobody said that, actually. So you could move into somewhat more continuous. Now, if you look at interesting researches like this one, and I can't find it anymore, but I want to have a newer version of this. In 2014, there were 4% of companies or teams that actually delivered multiple times a day. There was 13% who never deployed into production that year. How is that even possible these days, right? Of course it went better, but still in 2015, there was 4% of companies that never went into production the whole damn year. Can you understand that? Of course, we are going to move towards more often in production, because if you can go more often into production, you get into a continuous flow. That means the deltas, the differences between your current version and the next version are only very, very small. Which means it's easier to do the testing. It's easier to do the integration testing. It's easier to automate your process. The less mistakes you make. So you can go faster in building better software with less faults in it. That means you will get into sort of a continuous flow. It doesn't mean, by the way, you have to use Jira. I'm not saying you don't have to use Jira. I'm just saying it's just a tool, right? Don't get hung up on a tool. So this is showing at my previous client, one of the teams. The only thing we did is we put items on the backlog on the left side, started working on them, and removed them on the right side. That process usually takes about 2 to 3 days to get them through. And then they're done, right? And the only thing you have to measure is what's the time it takes from an item to come in to an item to go out again. That's the only thing you need to measure. It makes things really, really more simple. Of course, you have to automate everything to do that. And automating everything means automating all your tests, automating all your deployments, automating all your environments, automating even setting up new environments or anything you can think of. And this is one of our pipelines. This is actually a Jenkins screenshot. So we built the stuff. I'm going to try this one out now. See if I can get it running. Oh, great, it works. So we built the stuff, and then SonarQube runs over it. You know what SonarQube does? Well, you should. I'll show you. Then we Dockerized the whole thing. We deployed it, and we run the tests on it. We run the scenario tests on it. It gets to deploy to AWS. Some tests are running there as well. You can see it. And then we run it in the acceptance environment where it gets automatically deployed. We do a performance test automatically, and then it goes into production, right? This whole process takes about 5 minutes. So if I commit my code, and I've done my unit tests, and everything runs, then I get to deploy in production in 5 minutes. We didn't always do that, of course, but we could if we wanted to. Now, that is a huge improvement compared to what you could do just doing 2-week iterations, right? So I reckon you should all do this. And by the way, if you have no clue what SonarQube is, this is SonarQube. SonarQube is doing static code analysis. I would recommend to put it, it's open source, so you can just put it in any one of your pipelines. So what it does, for instance, is like measuring how many lines of code you have, what's the number of unit tests you have. So this is really well tested. It has a 97.2% code coverage, which is really okay, right? You should try automate all this stuff, and you could put it actually, you could put a block in here, right? If it goes under 65, just block it, just to make it easier, just to make sure that the quality is actually gained as fast as possible. Your feedback loop is as short as possible, because that is where you want to go. Now, in the end, if you put all this together, I'm going to add some more stuff to it anyway, you get to a very minimal process. You have a backlog. You pick an item from the backlog, you work on it, you finish it, you pick up the next item from the backlog. That's basically all we need to do in this field, right? The rest of it is tough. Now, if you look at software development, it becomes really, really simple if you do this, right? If you can automate as much as possible, and you can just have a very, very minimal project. You don't have sprints anymore. You don't have sprint planning sessions anymore. You have a backlog, and you have the dot on the horizon where you want to go. You have a purpose where you need to be. And everything should be sort of related to that. And that's all we need to have, right, in this field. Isn't that cool? Also, you can stop doing projects, right? Okay, so what about teams? Well, teams are going to be different again, I think. I think most of you will probably be, since you're all doing Scrum, or anything similar to Scrum, is you're used to the fact that you have teams with like 7 plus or minus 2, 6 or plus or minus 3 people in it. And I've been experimenting over the past few years with a very different model, actually. A model that actually allows us to be much more autonomous. Now, autonomy, or actually, I actually think of it like deciding what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and even who to do it with. That freedom is something that is very welcome at work. This is a picture I took of my team yesterday, actually. And they're actually looking at somebody talking about the architecture. And the architect on the screen, you can't see, but on the screen there says, basically, it's your code. You write it, you build it, you run it. And also, if it's in production and it breaks, we'll call you up. And that's it. And the rest of it, figure it out. We'll help you with do stuff. We'll facilitate you. But it's your choices. You choose the technology, right? And then one of the developers, who's not in the picture, he's on the left. He said, I'm going to build some Gatling tests to test my code, test my performance. And everybody said, yeah, sure. And nobody doubted whether that was actually needed. They just said, okay, sounds like a cool technology. Let's use that. And they started using that. So it makes it more autonomous. But becoming autonomous is very, very hard. Now, I see a lot of companies moving towards autonomous teams. For a lot of companies, that means, you'll have sort of autonomy. But whenever, as a manager, I think it doesn't fit, I'll sort of decide other ways, right? Usually, managers don't have a clue about what you do. Usually, people in the teams know much better, so don't do that. But it doesn't always work. But and you can go to the other extreme. Like this is at Zappos, and at Zappos, they think that everybody should have fun all the time. Would you want to work in an office like this? You're allowed to say yes or no, right? It's the beer, right? It's. I actually wouldn't want to. I love having some noise in my office. I usually make the noise as well. But if other people in my team start having to wear noise cancellation headphones and couldn't concentrate anymore, you're slightly overdoing it. It doesn't have to look like this, right? This again is at Zappos, by the way. I'm not sure I want to work here. And it can go all the way off. This is a picture of my girlfriend's leg. Where are you, Kim? Kim is doing talk in the very last slot tomorrow. So we're sort of opening and closing the conference, which is good. And in between, we'll drink beer, of course. So this is an actual job interview. She's interviewing for a senior management position at a huge retailer in the Netherlands, a very well-known company. And this to me is sort of like mandatory fun. This is actually their office. This is not IKEA, right? And it's like, why do we have to be in a pit full of little balls to do a serious job interview? It doesn't make sense to me. It's too much. But the thing is, real autonomy is actually really, really hard to get there. Because for most people, it's way out of the comfort zone. Usually people say, if you say to somebody, oh, you're autonomous now, right? But the whole team is autonomous. The first question they'll usually ask you is, what do you want us to do? That's not exactly how it works. But teaching people how to be autonomous is extremely hard. And I'll show you the picture. The thing is, we are all sheep. And you think, sheep? What's with sheep? Well, this is with sheep, right? This is an interesting picture. This is a herd of sheep. And there's a gate in the middle of the picture. You can see that probably if I put my nice circle on it. See, there's a gate. There used to be a whole fence. What they did is they removed the fence. And the sheep still get going through the gate, right? That's us, right? That's us developers. We do that too, right? People say you go left, you use Jenkins, you use Jenkins. I'm not saying Jenkins is bad, by the way. I like Jenkins. But or Jira, right? If the manager says, yes, we are going to use Jira all over the company, you just say, okay. You don't figure out whether it works for you. Or even to say no, right? We don't like Jira. This is an arbitrary example. I'm not bashing Jira here. Anyway, so you're allowed to say no, right? It's your life, and you only have one life. Make sure to master your own life, right? But again, autonomy is really, really hard. And there's no recipe for it. I don't have the recipe. I can say, oh, draw now. I can draw the first two circles for you, so to give you some guidance, and the rest of it, you have to draw yourself. You have to figure it out, right? Now, there's one thing we figured out over time, and I'll show you a nice movie clip. That is, less rules work. Let me show you a short video. I love this video. I took it last week in Medan in Indonesia, and I'm in a car, so I'm actually filming this, next to the driver. So the driver's Indonesian, of course. So we're heading towards a crossroads, and we want to go to the right. Now, watch what happens, and watch how many signs there are in the street, right? Signs everywhere that tell you where to go, where to stop. There's a traffic light. There's actually a traffic light. Look at the traffic light. It's on the right. Both the red and the green are on. What does that mean, right? Well, to be honest, nobody looks at it. This is cool. Right? Could you imagine this happening here in Europe? You could, right? But the funny thing is, it works. I'm not saying there's not accidents there. There are quite a few, actually. But we got off the crossroads sort of safe. You know what happened is, there's so little rules, and what people do is they start to communicate. Whenever you get to a crossroads, you communicate. You look at the other people on the crossroads, and you look what happens. Now, I'll show you a picture, which is basically at the crossroads about 100 meters from where my house is. It's this one. This is a country, the Netherlands, that is over-regulated with rules. We have traffic lights everywhere, there's signs everywhere, there's police. Well, they didn't wear that before the accident probably, but so there's lots of signs everywhere. You get blinded by all these rules, right? And what happens if there's so many rules is that people just follow the rules. They don't think, they don't communicate. They just think, my light is green, I'll just go. They don't look anymore if somebody's coming from the other side trying to ignore their traffic light, right? And it happens. And that's when you have accidents. So I think less rules actually work. So we went on to something called what we call micro teams. And we said, you know what? Basically, if you look at how we work, how we think, and it's not just the developers, it's also the testers, the QAs, the analysts, everybody basically. You don't say, okay, I have this regular cadence that from 9 to 12, we'll think and work, and then from 1 to 6, we'll do that again, and that's it. Your mind doesn't work like that. Your mind works all the time, right? Your mind works like the blue line. I have most of my ideas when I'm in the shower. Oh. Anyway, so I have most of my ideas while I'm in the shower, or while I'm watching TV, or while I'm playing a soccer game somewhere. That's when ideas happen. They happen all the time. So you should facilitate that much more, I think, right? Also, if you look at software development, it's becoming more difficult than it ever was. When I started writing code, it was really easy. I wrote some code, created an executable, put it on a floppy disk, put it in somebody else's machine, it ran, sort of. We don't have that anymore. Software development is becoming multifaceted. It's becoming very, very complex. You have different people knowing about different things, like about UX and front-end and back-end, and there's an architect, and somebody knows about how to deal with AWS or Azure or whatever, and there's a QA who knows about Cucumber and about Selenium and whatever, right? There's different people having different specialties. Also, if you look at your backlog, it basically, if you look at it, you see that every work item needs a different skill set. There's no two work items that exactly require the same skill set, right? So that means sometimes you need an architect and a backend developer and domain expert. Sometimes you just need a developer and architect. Sometimes you need a QA and an ops or whatever you might have, right? So what we started doing is saying, well, you could say, oh, wait, there's some more slides in here, right? I'll do them too, right? So if you could put less people working on a single item instead of a whole team, just have 2 or 3 people working on it, communication becomes easier. And I see also in agile environments that we have way too many meetings. There's way too much stuff, too much overhead, too much fluff in our field, right? Personally, I don't really like meetings. If I can skip them, I do. Because I always ask myself, what's the value for me to be in this meeting? The more people there are in a meeting, the longer it lasts. The smaller the chances that you will actually get to a decision. So you could try to get as minimal as possible with all this stuff. And I'm saying minimal is better, usually, right? So the thing is, all this communication, I get totally flooded with it. I have like 10,000 Slack channels that I need to follow, right? I have 17 Jira boards, 12 Trello boards. I have meeting requests. I have email. People phone me up. People text me on WhatsApp or whatever. We have way too much communication and collaboration on this. We should just be better at it. Have it face-to-face in smaller teams. So I hope now we get where we are. So we sort of started changing the teams again. We said, you know what? If you look at traditional teams where all the roles are in different teams, and if you're old enough, you've worked in these projects. I've seen them, right? Where the architects are somewhere in their tower, usually literally in their tower, and the analysts are somewhere else, the developers are somewhere else, the testers are in the basement, the operations people are in a different building, different planet usually. Well, that's not really nice. And when Agile came, we started doing multidisciplinary teams, and I still like that. I like that idea. But the number of skills you need to do actual software development, to do all of it, including the operations, putting it in production, keeping it in production, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So what we basically started doing is saying, we'll just have this pool of people, this group of people, maybe 20, maybe even 30, that together have all the skills to work on all the items that come on the backlog. And the items come on the backlog from the shared vision of the company or whatever it comes from, right? And every time somebody picks up an item from the backlog, usually happens during stand-up meetings, because I still have them, although I find them really boring, but because I've been doing them so long already. And somebody picks it up and says, I'm going to, build this service into AWS Lambdas, and I need some help with that. Is there somebody who can help me? And somebody says, yeah, I'll help you with it. I'll pick it up. We'll pick it up together. You get sort of a micro team of 2 people working on a single item. And then the next person comes along and says, I'm going to do this because this is what I know or what I want to know or what I learned from. Can you help me out? And some other team forms. Now, every time a new work item is done, some people will pick up on the next item on the backlog, right? And when you do that, it sort of shifts. And it shifts continuously and dynamically. Now, and that happens so all the time. So you get all these, let's say, micro teams of 2 people working on this. This is a developer and an ops guy working on something. This is 3 people, like 2 developers and a tester working on something. This is a senior developer teaching a junior developer while working on some performance issue. And you get these shifts into these teams all the time, and it's dynamically. And it's not regulated. This is the team itself that does this, right? There's no management what you need whatsoever. You just need the group of people with the right skills to do the work in flow without management, just having a backlog. And this is a model that I tried to work with for a couple of years, and it kind of works. And you might think, where's the manager? Well, there is no manager anymore here. Leaderships become contextual. It becomes, we're working on this item. Hey, let's look at it. Maybe we should ask him to join or her and to help us out. It changes all the time depending on the topic. Who's in the lead depends on who knows about it, who wants to know about it, who puts the other people together. And it sort of forms, well, again, dynamically or organically, if you like that word better, right? So that changes again. And again, if you do this, just have a backlog and a group of people working on the items on the backlog, you can just stop doing projects. Now the last part. And the last part is about, of course, the code itself. So being an old guy, I've spent a lot of my time working on monolithical applications. Now, to be honest, monoliths don't have to be bad. It's just that usually when they're aging and when they grow, they become more and more spaghetti, independent of the technology or the underlying architecture you have. And when that happens, they become harder to maintain. They become much harder to test. Or they're built in a technology that you cannot innovate on anymore. Like, for instance, if you're still building in COBOL, is anybody still doing COBOL? Well, I'll tell you the truth. My previous client has 15 COBOL developers on board. Their main product is built in COBOL. It compiles to Java every night. It's not a joke. That's true. But if they want to build a web application on top of that, they're doomed, basically, because they can't change the Java because it's generated, and you cannot build a web application in COBOL or a mobile application. So what do? Then it becomes complicated. And the thing is, basically what Charles Darwin says is, it's not the stronger of the architectures that survive, nor the most complex ones. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. That means also your architecture needs to be lightweight. The elements in your architecture need to be small. That means, yes, we are all going to move towards microservices and serverless and whatever comes after that. Right? That means everything will be built in very small pieces. Now, building in very small pieces is not as easy as it looks like. It's actually very hard because you have to read Martin Fowler's definition of what a microservice is. Actually, he says, in short, and then the rest of the text follows, right? So read it in the train or when you have trouble sleeping or whatever, what good time to read this actually. The thing is, we are going to move there, right? We are going to move towards a whole bunch of microservices. When I left my previous client, they had over 100. And again, what we also did is we split up the front end as well. So it's not a single big application sitting on top of a whole bunch of services, even external services. You can also split up your front end as well. And you see slowly getting patterns out and companies doing this, splitting up into micro apps or micro front ends, whatever patterns you try to use. And you'll see that happening too. Which basically means that all your software will be in very small pieces. And those pieces will, for the next coming years, less and less run on your own hardware or the hardware at your local provider. They will run more and more on the cloud. In the public cloud, in a private cloud, doesn't really matter. Whether it's in your own country or in a different country, that matters to some companies, not to all actually. But we will start doing that. We will have less infrastructure. We will stop building monoliths, and we will build everything in small pieces. So the monoliths will go out. We will get rid of them slowly. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but they're not flexible enough to keep up with the speed that we're moving at. If you're a bank with a large monolithical application, you are basically in trouble. That's why they have so many people employed. So, also it means having less infrastructure. It means Not anymore relying on your local minions, the operations people, of which they actually are called Erwin, John, and Frank, that if the server breaks down into villages down the road, they have to drive there with a spare thing and just screw it into the machine, start up the machine again. You might laugh at that and might say, this is a joke. No, it's really, this happened a couple of months ago, actually. And the thing is, they're not specialized enough. They will never be able, with the three of them, get so much knowledge about the whole environment that they will be able to beat the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles and the IBMs and the Oracles of this world. So most of us will go there, depending on whether you have privacy regulations or whatever you do. So we will move out of our own stuff, our infrastructure. That also allows us to go faster, shorter, and simpler. And that basically allows you to stop doing projects, right? You're awfully quiet. So did you get my point already? Or good. So in retrospective, I have like 5 more minutes. Well, I'm actually on time. I never do that, right? I'm basically a waterfall project going overtime all the time. But then I'm already here. Wow, that's cool. So in retrospective, some final thoughts. So their first thought is, get out of the idea that we are living in the complicated world, that we are able to manage the problems in this industry by thinking about it long enough, hard enough, with enough people, find a solution and build that for the next 3 years. We do not have the time to do that anymore, ever. And it will never come back. So all the people who long back for the older days of desktop applications, of waterfall, we're basically, get out of this business. Go into a different field. In our field, we will go faster and faster and faster and faster. It's just the way the world will keep turning. That means also we are in the complex field. We are in the complex zone, meaning the best thing you can do in your company is set that vision, set the goal at the horizon. Derive your purpose from that. Derive your business goals from that. Try to go there, but be flexible in that too. You know it will change. You cannot set it out at the horizon for 5 years and expect to exactly get there. Make sure you get on the road. It's a journey, right? That's a very popular phrase to use. This is the first time I'm ever using it in a talk, I think. So it's a journey on the way. Where do you actually get there? It depends on all sorts of stuff that you'll meet along the way. You get to work with different people, different architectures, different technologies. Technologies change. People change. Legislation changes. Brexit happens. Probably. We're not sure yet, of course. But so a lot of things can happen in between you and reaching that dot at the horizon. Right? So take very, very small steps to get there. Also, be aware that all these old processes that we have, including most of the agile processes, it's not the process that does the work, right? You need to figure out for yourself what works best. Whether that is Scrum adapted to anything, or whether that's Safe adapted to anything, whether you just use the practices from extreme programming, whether you move on from that, please go into continuous, by the way. And this is a nice one. Earlier this year, I was at a conference in Romania, and there was a quiz. And I said, oh, you should take the quiz. You know something about Agile. Yeah, I wrote a few books about it. And they said, well, this is the question. Ned Stark, you know Ned Stark, right? And is a senior product owner. Which approach do you think he will recommend when refining the product backlog? Typically sprint-like question. And I looked at the answers, and I'm like, they're all good, depending on the situation. And I couldn't care less, basically. And I said, no, you're wrong. It's A. And I'm like, what do you mean it's A? It could be B and C and D as well. It depends on how you look at it. It depends on what you, with your team, decide to do. And whether that works or not, it's up to you. So that means, basically, stop just copying somebody else's model and stick to it. Because if you stick to any of these models, whatever model that is, the thing you need to do is to continue to learn all the time, right? And continue to improve on it. It's basically the way Agile works. A lot of people forget that, actually, that you have to continuously learn and learn and learn. Now, it requires change. And the good thing is, you're all developers, right? Well, most of you, probably. Is there any managers in the room? Oh, you're just managing, or you do actual work? No, just kidding. That's a bad joke, I know. So the thing is, if you want to be more autonomous, if you want to move in a direction, if you want to change anything in your company, in your organization, in your team, in your life, there's only one thing you need to do, is you need to go out and do it. You cannot wait until somebody else says, yeah, we'll probably need to change, and you know what, first let's fill in all the TPS forms and then go on, and it doesn't work. If you want change, you have to be the one to do it. And there's only one person needed to do the change, right? It's exactly like here. And the interesting thing is, it's us. We're the technologists, we're the developers, and the QAs, and the analysts. But we are the ones who make the change, right? Because this is us. We make it sexy. And we change the world. So, basically, the only thing you need to do is never stop learning. And even more important, never, ever stop having fun. That's basically my last message. So, oh yeah, I almost forgot to say this, right? Stop please doing projects. It doesn't work in this industry, has never worked. Stop doing these. Go tell your managers at home, say, oh, Sander says we should stop projects. They will do that immediately, right? Because I've been here before on a project management conference, and I said that too. They almost killed me. And, well, that's about it. This is my reference slide. If you have any questions, I'll be here for the rest of the day and probably for the rest of the night drinking beers. But then my answers will be probably very different. Thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of the conference.